thank you for joining us this evening. I am Mary Schneider Enriquez. I am the Houghton Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Harvard Art Museums, and it is my great pleasure to have you join us for this evening's program, which I will be moderating. A few things before we begin the program. Most importantly, before we begin, I want to state that the Harvard Art Museums is located on the traditional ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. The museums also recognize the work of the Harvard University Native American program in cultivating the relationships that led to the creation of this acknowledgement. In collaboration with the Harvard University Native American program, the Ho Family Student Guides have created a digital collection of some of the works of the museums that speak to the Native American experience. This collection will help spur further conversations about Native American representation at the museum. A link to that is in your chat. This evening's film screening is offered in conjunction with two Harvard exhibitions. The first, in the place in which I am speaking, the Harvard Art Museums, where Krzysztof Wodiczko portrait is currently on view and will remain open until the 17th of April of this month, of course, here at the museums. And at the Graduate School of Design, an exhibition entitled Interrogative Designs, Selected Works of Krzysztof Wodiczko, which is open through this Friday, April 8th. So please make sure to come see it. Both of these exhibitions can be seen. Do get on the website, especially with the Graduate School of Design, to see the hours and requirements. But we encourage you, and I think after this evening, you'll be extremely excited to come see both if you weren't already. The exhibitions were organized jointly by the Harvard Graduate School of Design and my colleague there, Dan Borelli, and the Harvard Art Museums, and they were made possible by the Graham Gund Exhibition Fund. On that note, I would like to acknowledge and thank our director, Martha Tedeschi, and the Graduate School of Design Dean, Sarah Whiting, for their support and enthusiasm for this project, which has been several years in the making due to the pandemic. And I would also like to acknowledge and thank Dan Borelli, my collaborator at the Graduate School of Design, with whom many years of work, great enthusiasm, and many ideas have been exchanged on the importance of the practice of Krzysztof Wodiczko. Before we get started, I want to share a few logistics about today's discussion. We're using the webinar format in Zoom, so you will notice that your microphones are muted, your videos are off. Instead, we invite you to submit brief questions via the Q&A box, which you should be able to access at the bottom of your screen. We will actually begin. I will do an introduction, then we'll have a conversation between the filmmaker and director, Maria Niro, who's with us tonight, and the artist, Krzysztof Wodiczko. We will then provide the link and password for you after their discussion to watch the full documentary. For those of you who are able to stay until the end of that documentary, we will gather again for a brief Q&A with both Maria and Krzysztof. Feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box at any time. And now we turn our eyes and ears and minds to tonight's program. What we are going to see tonight is a film called The Art of Unwar, as you see on your screen. It's an in-depth exploration of Wodiczko's life and the art interventions he creates as powerful responses to the inequities and horrors of war and injustice. The film delves into timely works such as Abraham Lincoln's War Veteran Project in Union Square, New York, where Wodiczko projects the voices and images of soldiers from the 20th and 21st century wars onto the statue of Lincoln. Throughout the film, the artist's powerful interventions become examples of how art can be used to disrupt public complacency. The evolution of Krzysztof Wodiczko's political art unfolds throughout this film, from his first intervention created in Warsaw in 1968 to one of his most ambitious projects and a focal point of this film, a radical proposal to transform Paris's Arc de Triomphe war monument into a site for peace-building research and activism. Wodiczko counters the monument's glorification of war and portrayal of distorted histories by constructing scaffolding around the Arc de Triomphe and transforming it into its complete antithesis. I think we all realize at this particular moment we are living, the work of Krzysztof Wodiczko touches upon so much of what we are concerned as a world and his voice, his ideas over time come to life through this film, just as they have in the works he created both at the Harvard Art Museums and his history of work, and you'll see at the GSD. I will say one more thing about Krzysztof, having worked with him for 3 years on this project. For those of you who have not heard me talk about it, it's been 3 years of extraordinary thinking about what democracy is today with Krzysztof and the people he interviewed and discussed these ideas with. It resulted in Portrait, our commission in the art museums. He is a great teacher, a great thinker, and a great humanist whose creative abilities you will see in crystal clear moments that Maria Niro has brought to life. And I look forward to having you see that. Maria has done an incredible job, and I want to introduce her here to say she's a film and sound artist whose work includes long form documentary and experimental shorts that blend poetic visuals and sounds with non-narrative forms to create a collage of oral and visual prose. Her film that you'll see tonight, The Art of Unwar, is soon to be released on New Day Films, is a feature-length documentary chronicling the life and political work of the acclaimed artist Krzysztof Wodiczko. To date, she's completed one feature-length documentary and over 41 short films with original sound that she's created. Her films have screened and exhibited in galleries, museums, and theaters worldwide, including the Queen's Museum, Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, Anthology Film Archives, Whitechapel Gallery, and many others. She studied film and media studies at the New School for Social Research, and she proudly serves on the advisory board of More Art, a nonprofit organization that supports collaborations between professional artists and communities to create public art and educational programs that inspire social justice. I now turn it over to you, Maria.
Thank you for having me here. I'm so glad that you could all be here, and the film is currently on its festival run. I'm excited that it's going to be screening at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. as part of Film Fest DC on April 30th at 2 p.m. And the registration for that begins on April 16th. And also the film will be participating in the New Jersey International Film Festival in June. That will be at Rutgers University, and that's also under screenings at unwar.com. The film is very timely, of course, because of what's happening in the world today. I want to say that it's been an absolute privilege to immerse myself in Krzysztof Wodiczko's life and work. And I chose to make this film about an exploration of specific works that Krzysztof created over the past 5 decades, rather than a survey and a typical portrait of an artist. I felt like that the film itself, what if the film itself could also become an intervention that prompted people to think more about war and ask them to undo the biggest propaganda ever in human history, which is the notion that we need to have war. So I wanted to just focus on that very thing that had the most impact for me when I look at Krzysztof's wide oeuvre. It's a large body of work. So if you're expecting to see, everything, you'll be disappointed. Rather, I chose to just invest into the war trauma and displacement, which are things that concerned me deeply as well. So I feel these interventions, they're not only incredibly important works that were needed at the time that Krzysztof created them, but they're works that we need to engage with at this very moment, and probably, sadly, into the future. To me, these public interventions, they're not only relevant to our times, but essential to a greater meaning of the world. And a lot of people tell me, wow, this film is really it couldn't have come out at a better time. But to be honest, a decade ago when I envisioned making this film, U.S. soldiers were coming home from the United States' brutal invasion of Iraq. And now, a decade later, this urgent and powerful message of these works are just as potent, if not more. So I think that, Krzysztof's idea of war, which is a focus in the film, it's the heart of the film, is just so important. And I think with that idea, I'll turn it over to Krzysztof to have him maybe speak about a little bit on war, whatever he needs to speak about.
Thank you, Maria. Difficult time. We see vividly the war horrors, and horrified by them, we feel the imperative to stop the wars and to put an end to their perpetuation. It is the most disappointing and deeply worrying, especially for me, who was born of war, people like me, who remember war after the war as children. It's deeply worrying to see Europe, the winner of Nobel Peace Prize, received for building successful economic and political mechanisms for war prevention, to actually become a terrain of war, the terrain of devastating war. The threat of nuclear weapons adds new and even more horrifying dimension to such worry and such a crisis. Albert Einstein said that atomic bombing of Hiroshima has changed everything except the way of thinking. Today, we're witnessing the painful evidence of this. Some facts are so large that we do not see them. The largest such fact is that the war poses a mortal danger to our civilization. So we must dismantle this powerful cultural and psychological conditions that contribute to the successful war mobilization and to, at least initially, overwhelming support to war, as we see at this point in Russia. It's a difficult task. But most national cultures, including our culture here in the United States, are in fact very much cultures of war. Our identity, singular and collective, is formed during, before, after, and between the wars. In my old country, Poland, there is a saying, somewhere between the war memorials, there is Poland. The artists, in collaboration with others, must definitely think and act towards undoing of the culture of war and making culture of unwar. This, when I say culture of war, I mean practically the enormous amount of works of art, of war monuments, memorials, and other war cultivating arts, whether they are sculptural, architectural, painterly, literary, filmic, theatrical, musical, as well as war games, militaristic games and toys, parades, battle reenactments, events of war commemoration that are in fact war celebrations, plus all heroic nationalistic war narrative in history, textbooks, language, and everyday expressions. So those are the symptoms, the forms, the symbolic forms. So the culture of war is around us. and resides inside of ourselves as a toxic explosive implanted in us from within and without. That must explode in any time and every day. Most of us, in fact, in this sense, we are the living war memorials. So we must unwar our cultures and we must unwar ourselves. But artists, I'm one of them, I feel they can and must help in such a complex project. Through millennia, we greatly contributed, I must admit, to building of culture of war, to all of its aesthetic and ideological forms. We have been experts, even academic experts, in doing this. So many, of course, artists who also contributed to challenging the culture of war, and there is a long history of that, we have to remember. So since we could do it, we can undo it. And we must use our expertise. So this is, of course, it's extremely difficult project as aesthetic. Because we have, we don't be experts in this, but also to undo, dismantle the psycho-ideological and political and aesthetic operations of culture war. That requires lots of thinking and lots of work. Of course, not everything can be done by any single person. We are doing this as those who are making films, working in theater, in literature. This is happening. Without that, the situation will be, I profoundly believe, much worse. So many of my own attempts in this direction, as well as their interpretations by generous others, are presented in Maria Niro's film that will be screened today. But war and peace building process is not simple. It is an ongoing struggle. Again, in the time of horrors of the return of war in peace building Europe, it is difficult to be optimistic and intelligent at the same time. Nonetheless, one must try. Thank you.
Krzysztof, I think well, unless either of you want to add another word, we might begin to watch your film. Hello, welcome back. Thank you. That was so powerful. And I know from my experience of working with Krzysztof, it really captures so much more than anyone could ever know. So Maria, congratulations. That was really just a very powerful hour we just had. I think before we open to questions, I wondered if either of you had anything you wanted to add, having watched that again. And if not, we have questions before us. So it just, each time I see it, I come away with a whole different sense of questions and the timeliness of this, as you already pointed out, Maria.
Yeah, I think for me watching it, I've seen this film like 1,000 times because I was the filmmaker and the editor as well. And I did get to a point where I couldn't see it anymore. But now, like, I did watch it tonight and I see it and I think about what's going on right now. And there's so much that sounds familiar, you know, like it's like, it's almost like so big that I can't even describe.
Yeah.
That there's so much going on in there. And to hear the voices of especially Lamise and Amin, her son,
Yes.
you know, it's just so powerful. And I think of what's happening in Ukraine right now when she's talking about the bombing, and I imagine that, you know, I can hear that and imagine these people going through hell again and again, and also the veterans. I mean, nobody escapes from war. There are no winners. The old adage: there are no winners in war ever. And Christoph's words about us
Yeah.
romanticizing the war and fighting for our country, and fighting for our leader, and we're seeing it right now on such a large scale. It almost feels like we're in like the Roman games, Roman times. Yeah, and it's kind of sad because we seem to be so far away from building this arc around the Arc de Triomphe. It was so to shift our consciousness into unwarring. We have so much work to do, and I can just say that I tried to do my part by making this film, because I really feel like we really need a radical shift of consciousness when it comes to war, and that we need a radical anti-war movement which is really missing from society. And I know a lot of people are shocked and a lot of people don't want this war, but that's not enough. That's not enough. More artists need to make more work. More philosophers need to talk about it. More thinkers, more writers. We need to talk about this in school. We need to do more.
Yeah, on that note, one of the questions from our audience is, in particular, addressed to both of you, but Krzysztof in particular, is how might we be able to use what you've already taught us in respect to the current situation in Ukraine?
It's I don't know really how many people are in Poland or Slovakia or Hungary who escape Ukraine, maybe definitely 4 million probably people. We have to recognize that those are almost exclusively women and children. So among that, maybe 1 or 2 children with one mother, or maybe more. It's very hard to know, but this is an enormous amount of children and women. It's a very special situation to really think what it is that must be done especially for children, so they will not transmit to the next generations as much trauma as they would if they didn't get any help. So it's a question of psychotherapeutic help, or also involvement of artists whose work has a therapeutic dimension. I guess I might be one of them, but I wish I was there to help. Still, I do work with students in Warsaw, meeting them twice a week. And also we work with specialists who help children, with traumatized children. So the students are learning actually how to engage children in projects that are cultural, that focus them on the life rather than death, of some joy and sense of the future, and authority, not authority, but agency, of certain power of doing things, and also opening up and speaking and so forth. So those are the primary. There's a primary work has to be done, of course, also with parents, with mothers. You have to also keep in mind that fathers are missing. They are not there. And also the situation of so many people in Poland who opened their homes as shelters. They cohabit and they're living together. There's enormous amount of impact of this war. My own experience as a child might be in some way similar, but I cannot really imagine that they are as similar because I don't remember war. The war, I remember post-war, the situation after war. So well, one has to be clear that those children don't have really parents. They are becoming parents to their mothers right now. They are learning languages, as we actually realize how fluently in English this boy was speaking from Iraq. They are doing all of the calculations. They really are in charge of the future. So I don't know what should be done. This is a shocking situation. But there's so many people who are involved in Poland in helping. In every profession, every institution is offering so much help. It's amazing. So this in itself brings some optimism that there will be some easier recovery, otherwise impossible without so much help.
One of the things that one of the other questions that was raised, and I know the film mentioned that your own work with those who've gone through trauma and the experience right now you're talking about as well. One of the questions raised was how much, basically saying that your work was very powerful and struck at a narrative about how your work with war survivors is somehow therapeutic in telling their stories, or cathartic, but also at the same time avoiding catharsis in a Brechtian sense, perhaps through bearing witness and through the displacement of public and private space in these projected interventions of light. What is your relationship to psychoanalysis, Krzysztof, in your process of working with these participants, if this isn't too heavy a question?
Well, I don't have a license to work professionally as providing medical help. So I still feel that artists can help, but they cannot replace the work of psychotherapists. So they're who really are trained, they have experience. But there is a recognition of supplemental work of artists whose work has therapeutic dimension and therapists, whether they are art therapists or therapists who work, psychologists or psychoanalysts. We need to work towards. So cultural project and psychotherapeutic project overlap. And we wish this is a so complex situation. In a more complex situation, more people should work together. So some of those were veterans with whom we work on those projects, like in Liverpool, for example, or in Poland or in Holland. They are. They do have therapeutic help. They work with therapists. And in fact, at one point, especially in Warsaw, those therapists came to see the projection, the war veteran projection. And we congratulate each other. Veterans congratulate therapists. Therapists congratulated me. I congratulated therapists and veterans. And because it is such a great work together. Without what they can do, I cannot do. What I do, they cannot do. So I'm talking about therapists. But what those veterans can do, it's their own art of therapy. They themselves are artists in testimonial art. because it was, of course, with the help of everybody around, they are developing their capacity to express, to find words, recording, re-recording, discussions, all of that. So there is an art of witness, art of survival, and art of testimony.
Another question that's been raised, and very much one that you can speak to from your own experience as with all of this, but as a professor, both first at MIT and now at Harvard, now for more than a decade. But the individual says, thank you very much for the incredible work and impressive documentary film. How can universities help to educate peace in arts and other fields? And I know from knowing some of your students, and who we also heard on in the documentary you do in your work, it is part of what you do, but how would you respond to that thought?
Well, we definitely need programs in peace building matters. Actually, peace education is it's quite a strong part of educational program in Japan. So in fact, after Hiroshima projection, the mayor of the city of Hiroshima told me that this was a good of work of peace education, he said. But so that means that there is so much work that can be done to build peace, but also to educate people how to resolve conflicts without violence. So one could combine conflict transformation, for example, courses and workshops, with peace building workshops. Maybe not at the same time, but just having a more complex educational programs. So what can I say? There's definitely not enough of this. There are institutes who work, for example, institutes of centers for conflict mediation, on conflict transformation or conflict resolution. For example, after the project in Derry, London Derry, when we film enormous amount of material, lots of testimonies of people who used to shoot at each other not long time ago. Only small part of it became part of the projections in Derry, London Derry. And Maria Niro was there actually filming and witnessing this. But what I want to say is that maybe 85–90% of the material was not used, but it was given to the archives of Conflict Mediation Center in Derry, London Derry. So in the media projects, cultural projects in public space can be extremely useful to for other fields and research, and including this conflict resolution and transformation workshops. So what can I say? The answer is, it's a very good suggestion to implement those courses in our university education.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit because you have a question from a 9-year-old who wants to know, given your creative abilities, what was one of the first objects you created as a child?
The first object?
Work of art or invention.
As a child?
Mm-hmm.
It was, there was it's very hard to, I have so many my attempts to make
exactly
artistic projects very early in my life. I guess that was a portrait of my father, extremely tired of preparing for concert analyzing things. So it won actually competition of children drawings.
Ah,
We did see my father on photographs, but
sure.
I focused instead on his hand, extremely tired with all those veins and so forth.
Yes.
That probably moved somehow the jury, so they awarded it. There were lots of fathers like this.
Oh, that's really wonderful.
And mothers as well. So
Yes.
that's all what I recall on the earliest work that was somehow recognized.
Another question related to your work is what kind of road, as we learned more from the film about your project of the Arc de Triomphe, what kind of roadblocks have you faced, and where does that sit in the road right now in your plans and process?
The roadblock is the changing politics. The projects of this kind can only happen with support of the highest authorities. Thinking of the context of French political and cultural system. So it will have to be a president who would endorse this kind of project. Of course, it will have to be a number of people who will present it to this president, and it will be a certain kind of discourse and movement towards this. Politics changes, and right now I don't feel that a president of France would endorse this kind of project, because he is very much into mobilization of Europe towards European armed force, army, independent or somehow autonomous in relation to NATO. So it's quite now the present situation is, of course, it's tragic, it's a catastrophic, horrified situation, but the outcome of this may be also horrifying, maybe militarization of Europe, creating more and more of a European armed forces. It's very difficult to say in what direction such process will lead. Historically, we know that once there's a powerful army, eventually it's being used. So the question, it's very hard to elaborate and speculate on this, but there is the very foundation of European Union, the only reason it was formed to avoid wars in Europe, is shaken, because now we have war in Europe. It's not within the European Union, but in fact, European Union becomes part of it. So there's no longer there's no longer image of Europe as a place that secures peace, that actually is building conditions for prevention of war, which is its foundation. It's a reason for its existence. Of course, it's hard to imagine it, but hopefully it will be still the case. So somehow that I tried, as I mentioned before, it's very hard to be optimistic and intelligent at the same time. But I think one must. So the question is, well, here actually Maria mentioned about anti-war movement. I think I agree, it's the right moment. In fact, the first international movement against war, it was international, I think, League of Women against, for peace and justice, was the first international movement against war organized by women at the end of First World War, where the atrocities were maybe unknown before in the history of this planet terms of enormous amount of destruction, human and physical. There was battles that million people could die on both sides in one battle, like in Verdun. That was a moment. So, of course, it's supposed to be last war, the First World War. And fortunately, it was not. But the movement, extremely positive impact on even formation of a League of Nations and then United Nations and European Union eventually. So let's hope that there will be some new movement, maybe more complex, more educated by the failures of previous attempts to secure the world without war, or even part of the world. We also have to remember that the wars are everywhere. We are focusing now on that one. We're shocked by this, but we should remember about all of other wars that keep continuing.
In a different kind of sense of conflict, one of our members of the audience asked about, well, thanks you, Maria and Krzysztof, for reminding us of the severe problems of the homeless people, the xenophobia against immigrants and illegal laborers that happened in the 1980s and 90s. And the question is, how could you guide us, Krzysztof, to remain optimistic in our wills to fight against these same problems that have never stopped?
I just share my strong belief that without a work of people in all fields, cultural, scientific, legal, but also artistic, the situation will be much worse. When we stop working on it, we'll just go backward. It is difficult to be optimistic when you see things right now, but it's important to trace back that our thinking is actually changing. The very fact that the European Union was formed and managed so well for such a long time in the history of Europe, it's just unbelievable shift for better. You know, if you look historically, all of the wars, and each generation went through war, or maybe more than one war, 2 wars. That's how I remember grandparents and parents and great-grandparents in Poland. And now we have a generation that didn't go through war. Maybe right now there is a war, but you know, between the time I was born during one war and this war, which is not exactly what we went through, of course, in Poland, it's happening across the border, frighteningly similar. Still, it's a long time. It's a time of my life, and I lived many years without war. So there is an optimism here. There is optimism, but it has to be educated and has to be a careful, skeptical, and still determined process to actually end those wars. There are also changes in the legal system, to be optimistic in that sense, because after the International Criminal Court adopted several crimes, first was war crime, the crime against humanity, genocide, and the last one is crime of a war of aggression. So this is the first crime that is being committed here by government of Russia and the military. This is a crime of a war of aggression. And then there is inside there are other crimes. There are war crimes. Now there is a discussion, talk about possibility of genocide and so forth. So what I'm saying is that there is some recognition that the war actually is more and more of a criminal operation, criminal adventure, criminal act by United Nations Charter. You know, and there are lots of countries that sign those various documents, including the Rome Charter on the war of aggression. So there are things that were unthinkable years ago, 100 years ago. So we should just keep working. And eventually the war will be abolished as the way to resolve conflicts. And the recipient of Nobel Prize, Joseph Rotblat, who was the founder of Pugwash Conference, he said that abolition of nuclear weapons, which was objective of his organization, is not enough. You can abolish nuclear weapons, but people know how to make them. So sooner or later, someone will make it because you cannot destroy knowledge. So conclusion in his speech, in accepting the prize was, the conclusion is the war has to be abolished, especially now when you have nuclear weapons. And the recent conclusion was United Nations by many superpowers. They concluded that nuclear war cannot be won. That was it's an official statement signed by superpowers, including actually Russia, France, unless I'm mistaken, also by Britain and even China. I'm not sure. This I'm not sure. Don't quote me, but there is a progress here.
We're going to take one last question for the evening, and that is one from another artist who wants to ask you, what are you working on now, Krzysztof? For 50 years of extraordinary work. That's a big question, I think.
Well, this is a very early stage of my work. I don't know how far we'll go, but I was asked to propose a memorial in Warsaw to, I mean, the commemorative installation permanent project that will be focusing on the major war crime. Some people say act of genocide by German Nazi troops during the Warsaw Uprising in 1944. And that is only for one district of Warsaw, which in 4 days, 160,000 people were killed in 4 days by German Nazi troops. When Warsaw itself, during the Second World War, 800,000 people were killed. But this district of Wola, it's called Wola massacre. It is quite known. I could not say no to this proposal, but I am struggling a lot and also focusing now on recording whoever survived that massacre. So there are still people alive, mostly because there were children battalions during the Warsaw Uprising. And those very young soldiers, they may be 95, 94 years old. They still exist, mostly women, actually. So I'm busy recording. And also there is, I suggested, and it was met with full support, to try to include in this commemorative project also children of those soldiers, including children of German soldiers, to really turn this memorial into, well, you can, in this sense, call it unwar memorial. Because all those who were fighting or who survive, they all are united around one idea. There should not be a situation like this again. So there is, it's maybe part of a larger unwar commitment that I have. And that's what I'm working on right now.
Fantastic. Well, I would like to thank Maria for sharing your incredible film with us tonight, and Krzysztof for again answering questions, inspiring us and allowing us to see through Maria's eyes as well the extraordinary career you've had to date, and we look forward to much more and to learning and being filled with hope through you. The list of further film screenings and the exhibition, both here and at the Graduate School of Design, is listed in the chat for those of you who would like to, and also I see on the screen right now. The exhibition of Krzysztof's work, just as a reminder, at the Graduate School of Design is open until this Friday, April 8th is the last day that it's open. And his work here at the Harvard Art Museums is going to be on exhibit through April 17th, and you need advance reservations if you go onto our website. So we hope you will have a moment to go to see both shows if you're in the United States. And I know a lot of our questions were coming from various countries of the world as well, so it may not be possible, but thank you all for your great questions, for sharing this evening with us, and for sharing this extraordinary opportunity we had with Maria and with Krzysztof. And I hope you have a good night. Absolutely, Maria.
Can I just add?
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Bridget. Yeah. And you know, that was quite an event also for me personally. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Krzysztof. I just wanted to say there were a few people who had asked about the release of the film. I am engaged with New Day Film, a very respectful educational distributor, and I look forward to working with them in bringing the film out.
Well, congratulations on that, Maria. It's been a real treat and pleasure to see this film with you and with Krzysztof.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you. I'm so honored.
Thank you all, and have a good evening. Take care. Bye-bye.